Now may we pray. Holy God, open our eyes to what you would have us see. Open our ears to what you would have us hear. And open our hearts to those whom you would have us love. Amen. Step 4. That we have made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. This is the 4th step in our 12-step sermon series, and today it's beginning to get real and perhaps a little intimidating. I don't know about you, but this step feels intimidating to me and a little uncomfortable. I don't particularly feel fearless about making a searching moral inventory. This sounds suspiciously like making a list of all my sins, past and present. Richard Rohr observes that those raised in a strict religious upbringing will usually recoil at this step. They're tired of judging themselves and finding themselves wanting. In fact, many are driven back to their addiction to quiet the constant inner critic. This might be the voice of a demanding parent, a rigid culture, or a finger-waving church. These voices echo long after the parent has died or the individual has left the culture or the church behind. And so confession and addiction may become a vicious cycle. However, Rohr does not see step 4 as a way to find out how good or bad we are compared with other people. Instead, he sees it as a way of illumination. So this chapter is entitled A Good Lamp. Rohr invites us all to begin what we talked about before, some shadow boxing. He is talking about what psychologist Carl Jung called the parts of ourselves we deny or hide, the shadow self. Confession involves bringing a light to those hidden places, the shadows. As Rohr writes, Jung certainly did not lead a perfect life, but his mistakes led him to recognize and heal the shadow self that lurks in our personal unconscious and is then projected outwards towards others. And Rohr says this: the face we turn toward our own unconscious is the face we turn toward the world. And I'll repeat that. The face we turn toward our own unconscious is the face that we turn toward the world. That is, people who accept themselves accept others. People who hate themselves hate others. Only divine light gives us permission and courage to go all the way down into our depths and meet our shadow. Our gospel reading for this week tells of a time when Jesus shone a light on certain shadows that many of us would prefer to ignore. Each week this season, before we hear our gospel reading, we sing that song, right? Thy word is a lamp unto my feet. In singing this refrain, we are summoning the courage to ask God to shine a light not only on the gospel word, but also on our shadow selves. The story we heard today is spoken to the Pharisees and the scribes yet again, and in Luke's gospel, these groups represent the rigid religious, the finger wavers, and those who think they are righteous. Jesus tells the story of a rich man who is obscenely wealthy. He feasts daily and dresses in the clothing of royalty. Meanwhile, there is a poor man named Lazarus who sits at the rich man's gate. Lazarus's poverty is as extreme as the man's wealth. He is covered in sores from inadequate nutrition, lack of sanitation, and sleeping rough. It would be quite simple for the rich man to help Lazarus. He would not even miss the resources it would take to give him a meal or to provide him with a simple home. The problem is the rich man does not even see Lazarus in that way. He is safely protected inside his gates, free from the uncomfortable sight of the dogs licking Lazarus' sores. The story goes on. Both men die. Lazarus goes to be with Father Abraham in a kind of heaven, And the rich man descends into Hades, a fiery hell. And by some means of a special portal to heaven, the man can see Abraham with Lazarus at his side. Well, this rich man is so accustomed to having people like Lazarus at his service, he doesn't understand the seriousness of his situation. And he implores Abraham to send Lazarus with a drop of water to cool his lips. Abraham reminds him that the poor man is no longer conveniently at his gates. Now there is a huge chasm between them, and there is no way that Lazarus could cross over. Still, the man doesn't get it. Perhaps Lazarus could be sent to warn his 5 equally wealthy brothers about the torment to come. And again, Abraham tells him that since they haven't listened to the teachings of the prophets, they will not listen to anyone else. It's too late. Well, this is certainly not a comfortable tale for the obscenely wealthy who ignore the poor. We here mostly are not obscenely wealthy, but this is still a tale for us, to stir us when we begin to feel too comfortable. If we are truthful, oftentimes we live in an uneasy kind of comfort with situations like this. There are the times when I see a person who is in need and I reason, oh well, I can't help everyone. And then I forget that I could actually reach out to someone. Or there are times when we justify the gates and barriers that we make as security so we can forget about the poor for a while. There are the times when we decide not to do a ministry here at the church because, well, the neighbours wouldn't like it. Or there are times when we decide that the last time we gave to the poor, they were scamming us. The story sheds a light on the poor man, even giving him a name, Lazarus. It also sheds light on our fears, our insecurities, our justification. It sheds light on our shadows. This story reminds us that ongoing shadow boxing is necessary. We don't just go to the gym one time to become physically fit. In the same way, we don't just examine ourselves once to become spiritually conscious. So the daily examine is one way of doing the shadow boxing. We tried that during our prayers of confession. Another way it might be to belong to a group like AA, in which others are willing to hear our confession and hold us accountable. And if we are to truly grow, we will need others to help us in doing our moral inventory. Sometimes we need the light of others' eyes on our shadows, and this requires us to be willing to give and receive feedback. Now, I admit I do not always relish feedback. For much of my life, I've been painfully aware of my shortcomings. And I'm sensitive when I make a mistake and I scold myself for not thinking of every outcome. This painful awareness sometimes means that I'm unwilling to look back on events reflectively. Instead, I feel shamed by the mistakes. I prefer to bury those memories in the shadows. When I was in seminary, I was required to do a training program called Clinical Pastoral Education, or CPE. And I took my CPE in a long-term care facility for the elderly in the Boston area. The program combined spiritual care for residents of the facility with a process of self-examination, one-on-one with my supervisor and also in a group setting. I made learning goals for the program, and one of these was decreasing my fear of getting things wrong and saying or doing the wrong thing, and decreasing my anxiety of being supervised in my work. During the course of the time at the care facility, my heart was broken open many times by the patients I visited. Most had some form of dementia and also other challenges such as hearing loss, macular degeneration, lack of mobility. I was moved by their physical, mental, and spiritual challenges. I realized that to serve these dear people, I needed to learn and grow. Each week, I wrote self-reflections, examining each patient's interaction in detail. And I worked with my supervisor to imagine how I might grow in my work. I invited critique from my fellow students who guided me gently and lovingly. And at the end of the program, I was better able to provide spiritual care. I had grown in my practice of self-reflection and receiving feedback from others. At times it was uncomfortable, but I look back on that time as a true blessing for myself and my relationships with others. Now, perhaps you're used to this pattern by now. Let's think about it. We have step 4, right? And we have culture, church, and our lives. And I think we're probably going to do this every week. So I invite us to summon the courage to imagine doing a searching moral inventory in our culture, in our church, and in our lives. And I wonder what it would look like if we took a searching moral inventory as a culture. In this young nation founded on high ideals, we are so intent on patriotism and loyalty, it's hard to imagine. What would it mean to admit that, like all others, our nation is not perfect? What would it mean for the United States to do a searching and fearless moral inventory concerning issues like slavery and the genocide of the Native American population? And how about the church? The church growth consultants encourage us to present a shiny image. We say, all are welcome in our loving family-sized congregation. But what would it mean to invite those who have been hurt by church in the past to come in and sit with us in this 12-step process? Together we could remember that we have spiritual growth to do, as well as numerical growth, as we examine both our shadows and our triumphs. Most of all, in our own lives, let's remember our goal is not to be perfect. It is to see ourselves as we are, illuminated by the divine light. Rohr points to the Apostle Paul's letter to the Roman Corinthians. The law was given to multiply the opportunities of failing, to which he adds, so that grace can be even greater. That is to say, God actually relishes the vacuum which God knows God alone can fill. And with that, may all God's people say, Amen.